Dear Harstem, I think lurkers are completely imbalanced. I'm going to be specific here, however. I think that lurkers take far too little skill to use compared to how difficult they are to counter. I don't think they're overpowered outright, but I think that much like carrier/High Templar spam, the fact that dealing with them is so much harder than using them, and there is such a thin margin for error, makes these units imbalanced. This replay is from a tournament, so my macro and micro are necessarily worse after playing many games on the trot. But my opponent is the same MMR as me. We should be on an even playing field. But we aren't. His army remaxes faster, it costs less, etc. This is all fine, I have no issues with it. This is how Zerg as a race are designed. The thing I take issue with is lurkers being such an incredibly easy to use version of the siege tank. Look at how the finals of IEM turned into TVT, but with bugs and abduct wars instead of tanks and matrix, with lines of lurkers spamming at each other like bots in a YouTube comment section. When it comes to using tanks, you have to think. I absolutely cannot just F2A move and siege them on top of my enemy like a mass lurker comp can. Let's take the fight at around 13 minutes as an example of my specific point here. My opponent suicides his army into a Terran siege line, thinking that he can get a flank. A misplay. I wipe him, F2, and then try to extend my siege and control of the map to his triangle third. My logic with this play is that if I can take an aggressive position and force him into dealing with me, as I start to destroy specific hatcheries and control the choke out of his main and net, I will force him into expanding to other harder to defend places. Once that's done, we'll enter late game Terran versus Zerg, where I can mess a Liberators and make his life harder, then finally go for the throat after simply trading better. But I make my own misplay. I overstim, overextend, and wind up losing everything, needing to fall back as the Zerg is now very far in the lead. From here, I totally lose control of the game. He is able to inflict damage for free, and I lose, taking third overall in the tournament. Good job on that, buddy. Congrats. But think about this. Before that fight, I had to play slowly and carefully around his mass lurker forces. I have to siege and unsiege Liberators, play carefully, slowly, never exposing a weakness in the overall defense of my position. This is how an army built around siege units has to play when they are Terran. When I miss micro, I lose many marines to the splash of his lurkers. By contrast, look at my opponent. Unburrow, A-move, control click, burrow. This simple micro, it's even easier than lips, and let's face it, holding rapid fire and waving my mouse around isn't exactly difficult. Forces me to back off and reassess if he times it anywhere in the ballpark of correctly. Even when he does suicide almost his whole army, the lurkers still achieve a Pyrrhic victory of a kind by decimating my infantry. My coaches say, just mass lip with range, or just make ghosts, lol. And while these are to an extent valid, I feel that the amount of value lurkers get for their extreme ease of use makes them an imbalanced unit that, while not necessarily overpowered, taint the dynamic of an otherwise fun to play matchup. If my opponent wipes my army with good bane control and splits, I can't respect it. If my opponent runs a massive Zerg force into a siege line, loses everything, but yet still somehow isn't knocked out of the game despite losing pricey siege units, I feel more irritated. But if my opponent has an easier to use and harder to counter siege tank that doesn't deal friendly splash damage and is far more forgiving with its positioning, then, and only then, I truly feel like the lurker isn't balanced correctly. Now, this guy goes on for about 4 more paragraphs, but I think we pretty much get the gist of this. He knows fancy words, and he's not happy with the lurker whatsoever. So, with all of that in the back of our head, let's just hop into the game here, because holy crap, this guy has a vocabulary that I'm kind of jealous of, I'm not gonna lie. But Pyrrhic? I didn't even know there were words with a Y that weren't yogurt. He's just using them in a sentence. It's absolutely unbelievable. So, alright, we're into the game. Mist in the bottom left as our Zerg player, and Wayfarer as our fancy top hat wearing, monocle using Terran player, who struggles with the lurker. Now, he actually raises a fair point, I think. And this is something that people often forget when they talk about balance, and it is something that I like to focus on. It is the ease of use of certain units. And he mentions the Carrier High Templar specifically, and I kind of agree with that. I think Carrier High Templar tends to be easier to use in the Protoss versus Zerg matchup than whatever it is that the Zerg needs to do in order to defeat that. And does that make it imbalanced? Not necessarily imbalanced, but it makes the game extremely frustrating. Now, the Lurker is a similar unit in this matchup that when the Lurker first comes out, Terran has a difficult time dealing with it if they don't have sufficient siege tanks, if they don't have liberators, if they don't have any ghost whatsoever. It can often feel like it's just an auto lose the moment Zerg kind of takes control of the game. And I really do sympathize with that feeling that Wayfarer has over here. It can feel that way if you don't have enough ghosts, or if you don't have tanks, or if you don't have map control. Like, it kind of 3-4 things that you need to have as a Terran in this situation to make the game somewhat more playable. Because it is a shift in power in the TVZ matchup that isn't seen with any other unit. With any other tech transition, there's never such a switch in power. That really makes the Lurker unique. Is that necessarily a bad thing? Is it necessarily imbalanced? No, there are certain units in other matchups as well that can kind of cause a massive power shift or a massive power spike. But with the Lurker, because of how Zerg works, you can build so many at once that at times it just feels kind of silly. Where as a Terran, you are completely in control of the game for the first, 12, 13 minutes. And then 10 Lurkers come out all at once. And the power balance completely 180s, and you very often just die immediately. This is extremely frustrating, and this can feel very imbalanced, and maybe there is something here. Maybe Wayfarer is onto something. Now, we'll do note that this is, of course, a diamond player, a tournament diamond player, by the way. So this was played in a tournament, as he mentioned. And he actually opens up with some pretty cool stuff. We saw him, I think he had an SCV over here that might have just died. Yeah, trying to block the third base, so a Reaper on one of the thirds and then the SCV on the other. So he tried his best to block the base. He's getting a standard triple CC opener. Like, this is a really good build order, a very standard build order. Gets the starport as gets a bunker accidentally, then follows it up with a starport. Not entirely correct, but very close to correct. Gets the starport before the Hellions as well. Has a fast second gas. Like, he knows his build order very well. This much is obvious to me. He's watched pro games. He can definitely copy a build, is what I'm trying to say. Okay, like this actually makes sense. It makes me happy to see. Like, he isn't all tall. He's not he doesn't just throw around a bunch of fancy words that I don't understand to make me feel inferior, and then play like some 4 bunker opener at his own natural while forgetting his command center. No, like he's swapping the tech lab with the starport. With the sting finishes, he starts into an orbital immediately. This actually looks pretty good. Now, Hellions, once Hellion 3 and 4 are out, most likely want to be going across the map. The reason why he's keeping these first 2 Hellions at home right now is because he lost the Reaper. And if you lose the Reaper, you don't know where the links are. And in that case, if you move out with your first 2 Hellions and there's like a link run by, you might end up losing a Mule and a couple of SCVs in your natural, which is frustrating and, well, quite frankly, not very good. Decides to follow this up with a Cloak Banshee, most likely double Cloak Banshee, and that should be 8 cars then as well, or 6 cars is also possible, of course, but most of the time it's 8 cars. Builds a reactor with this factory, and then should build 2 barracks at the same time here. Look at that. This guy actually knows exactly what to do. He has a very good build order, a very solid build order. Now, I'm a little bit disappointed that he isn't using these Hellions whatsoever. If you build Hellions, this is a harassment unit. It's a unit that gives you map control, a unit that can deny creep. It really doesn't serve much of a purpose into the mid game. So I am not quite sure why you would not be using it right now. Like, it is better to lose them in the early game and try to deal some damage. Well, that's not entirely true, because you can still use them to deal with run-bys, but just getting 6 Hellions early on in the game to deal with run-bys is not it. He also isn't using the Banshee whatsoever, so he invests a crap ton in harassment units, not to use them whatsoever, and that is a little bit surprising and also quite bad. I understand that if you're not entirely sure how a build order works, that you don't want to, you don't want to split your attention too much into the Hellions and the Banshees, but Hellion Banshee harass is extremely important and is one of the big things in this matchup, or just harass in general is one of the big things. If you don't check the Zerg player with your Hellions and your Banshees, he's going to drone up to an ungodly amount of drones really quickly, and no matter how well you're trading for the rest of the game, it's going to be impossible to actually win because your opponent will just have too much stuff. You need to keep the Zerg economy in check. That is just a fact of the Terran versus Zerg matchup. You need to deal some damage, you need to deny some creep, and you need to force links out of your opponent. Now, luckily this Zerg player is an honorable Zerg player, and although you're not harassing whatsoever, he says, you know what, I'll build some links, I'll build some Bane links, we'll get 14 extra links out, and even though you haven't done anything yet, it will cut into my worker count by a little bit. Now, these Banshees are absolutely not being controlled here. I mean, this is not harassment. You just shift click these across the map and lost 2 Banshees to kill a single queen. This is kind of ridiculous, and I'd suggest that if you're not going to use any harassment units, you should not be building them. It's pretty simple. It's basically, this is like buying a car without having a driver's license and not having any plans on getting a driver's license or driving the car. Like, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. You invest a lot into this. It delays your barracks, it delays your marine production, it delays your first medevac move out, and all you do is you just shift click it across the map. It actually makes that's like buying a car to use it as a target for water balloon practice. Like, you can have very many other targets that are way better at that job. You could have just opened up with a faster second Rex from Triple CC. It probably adds a little bit of safety. You get a lot of Marines in the early game, so no Banshees, so maybe slightly less safe. On top of that, I'd also like to note here for a second that you're starting your 2-2 before you are starting your combat shield. Your first 2 medevacs finish at the 8-minute mark. So although I was complimenting you in the early game here for your build order, these 2 medevacs with a Cloak Banshee 8 Hellion build order are supposed to finish usually, well, 6:45, and they're pretty late already in that case at a high level. You're finishing them an entire minute later than that for no real reason, at least that I can figure out. I don't really see why. On top of that, you also only have 56 workers, while your opponent has 86. You've done no damage whatsoever. You don't even know if your opponent has a third base. You have no scouting. He's on 5 bases. You're barely aware of the fact that he has a third. Like, you're not sure if this is a 4th or a 3rd base. You have absolutely no clue. You don't know whether he's a layer. You have 0 info. This guy is a Dark Enjoyer, by the way. Double macro hatch in the main. Huge fan of that. Hydralisk then already being thrown down. Like, this feller gets to make the switch into 8 gas, into Hydra then, and eventually into Lurkers at the 8-minute mark off of 91 workers. Like, Cyril is watching this and he's getting jealous. He's like, holy crap, this guy is the fastest transition in the world. And it's just purely because you haven't moved out yet for the first 8.5 minutes in the game. Not with your Hellions. Well, you've moved out with your Banshees, but rallied them into a Queen. Now finally you're moving across the map. You kind of pre-stim your entire army. Half of your reinforcements get picked off. Well, actually all of your reinforcements get picked off. You stim... Wait, did you just stim 3 times already? How did this happen? Okay, so we have 1 stim already being used here. I guess it's just a second stim that you use immediately. Yeah. Very unfortunate. No. Well, if there's any banelings that connect right now with your Marines, they're just going to get one-shot because you don't have combat shield. And luckily for you, that's actually not quite what's happening because there's not that many banelings. But Hydras will still be capable of taking you out. Anyway, you take out a base, and this is one of the things where a Terran would probably look at this fight and think to himself, well, resources lost, pretty close, about even. I killed a base, I killed 10 workers. denied a bunch of creep. And he writes in his little notebook, you know, that he has with his monocle and his stop and he goes like, fantastic. No, what's a better word for, marvelous trait. And it's like, great, marvelous. And then puts his little notebook down again. It's like, this wasn't actually a good trade. You're still down 30 workers. Your opponent could potentially already be going into Hive. You don't have a fort base yet. There's no second factory. And you're building a Thor. Now, the Thor is the one unit you do not want to be getting against Zerg unless there are Mutalisks or a crap ton of Brood Lords and it's late game. And you can play Thor Ghost or something like that. But this is not a unit that you want against Link Bane or Hydra Link Bane or Hydra Lurker or against Roaches or against Link Bane Ravager or against pure Links or against pure Baneling. Maybe you want it if your opponent is an idiot and plays Mass Corruptor, but in that case I still think Marines probably would be better. But it's just a terrible unit that you don't really need against a lot of compositions because it is slow, it doesn't have a, like, it doesn't outrange like a tank does. Tanks are the solution to Hydralisk armies, and especially knowing that a Lurker then could be on the way. Yeah, I would suggest getting more tanks over getting a Thor. I'm also really surprised, by the way, because when you wrote this entire post out, like, you kind of tricked me, I feel like. I really do believe that I got tricked there. The way that you wrote made me believe that you played a practically perfect game and that the only reason that you lost was the Lurker. You know, you use all these fancy words to say things that I didn't quite understand. But now I'm watching this. You're getting like 7 barracks off of 3 base. There's no fort base 9 minutes into the game. And you're building a Thor and you're going into Liberators, although you only have 3 medevacs at this point. It kind of feels like I've been tricked. It's like you show up to like a dinner party with your top hat and your monocle, and you sit there at a chair, and the waiter comes to your table and asks you, sir, what would you like for an appetizer? And you go, oh no, I don't require an appetizer. I'll be eating from my nose tonight. And you start spooning the boogers from your nose and eating them. And everyone at that table feels like they've been tricked by your appearance. And I feel like I've been tricked by your high level vocabulary and your fancy words. I'm not a fan of it. Like, you're still on 57 workers. You're way down in economy. And you still don't have combat shield either. I just, like, this is nowhere near close a perfect game, and you could have seen this as well, I think. Like, I think your analysis on why the Lurker is an annoying unit to play against so far has been spot on, but you're not really facing any of these issues. It's not like you've been playing with map control. It's not like you've been multitasking. You have not been tasking at all, like not single tasking, not multitasking. Half of the time in this game, I've been wondering whether you're actually tabbed into the correct screen or if you're browsing YouTube videos. It's like, it is difficult to see because literally nothing is happening. You're sitting at home with your crap army, with your wank eco. Now you start building Marauders. I do kind of like that most of the time. Start moving towards the left side. Okay, so a bit of a rotation. It's obvious that these 3 medevacs cannot support an army this size, especially with your willingness to stim your entire army for no real reason really quickly. Like, you're very trigger happy with those stims, just to get into position quicker, just to die faster. It's your second stim already, literally getting one-shot by Banelings right now. It is absolutely insane to me that you're winning some of these fights, by the way. Because it's not like you've been microing very much, or like winning, or at least it looks like you're winning some of these fights. Like, you haven't been microing too much, you're over-stimmed, you still don't have combat shield. Upgrades, I guess, are slightly in your favor. Here comes the 3rd stim. No scan available anymore. Now, this is of course an issue because you're completely lacking eco. So if you don't have extra orbital commands, this is another one of the things which actually is frustrating to play against Lurkers with, is if you don't have enough scans, you can't see them and they'll kill you with that. Big stims here. You just stimmed, by the way. Like, I do not wish to be, annoying or mean, but you haven't really microed your army whatsoever. So far you stimmed, and if a fight doesn't look good, you try to move back out of the fight. But there's no splits, there's no concave forming, like all of this is just kind of moving into it without forming concaves or doing any of the moves that Terrans usually do. Like there's no moving back either. You do siege up your units quite nicely, you know, he is good with the leapfrogging. Here comes a tank forward, this is a good scan as well, I like that. That's for sure. And I can move these tanks forward once again as well. Oh, this lurker's gonna die. You have a big army sitting at home. It's gonna join up as well. Still, only 61 workers. You're being completely outmined by your opponent. So, although it feels like you're doing a great job here, and although it feels like, oh, look at you denying a base, you're denying someone's, like, what is this? His 7th base or so? Like, he literally has 6 bases. If you take this base out of the equation, you're still on 3 bases. You're undersaturated at your 3rd, the only mining base that still has enough mineral patches, and you're oversaturated in your main and your natural. He flanks you. And this is the fight that you describe, I think, the 13-minute fight. So I kind of want to see that again because I missed the start of it. Here the Zerg moves in, it kind of flanks this. Don't forget, you still don't have combat shield. Your army is completely in the red. Yet you win this fight, obviously because the Zerg engaged in a weird angle, did not really burrow his lurkers. But even though he lost this fight, and he's down 7k in resources lost, by the way, 7k down in resources lost, you're still down 50 supply. He has a way bigger bank. The only thing he's truly lacking at this point is gas. And the funny thing is that so far, the lurker hasn't been an issue at all for you. In the early game, the first trade you did was 4.2k against 4.2k resources lost. And now you actually are trading a lot better ever since the lurker got introduced. You've been getting good trades. The lurker is not your issue. Your issue is that you don't have any eco yourself whatsoever. The issue is that you're not denying his eco whatsoever. This guy's been on 100 workers for the past 5 minutes, and you're surprised that he has a lot of crap. It's like, yeah, of course he has a lot of crap. This guy's been mining non-stop. Like, absolutely non-stop. Now, once again, you're just gonna pick up these Hydras. This Zerg player, actually his control of the units has not been so great so far. Like, the flanks, the attacks, the micro back and forth, it just hasn't been brilliant. And you could be, you know, kind of using that for yourself, and by expanding very fast and, you know, letting him attack into you maybe at some point as well, while increasing your eco. I'd rather just have these massive overstimmed armies. That is definitely a mistake. You really stim a bit too much. I think it's one of the big issues here. If you would have gone back, I wonder if you just would have been able to win the game if you had like 2 more medevacts waiting at home or so. Still no combat shield, by the way, 14 minutes into the game. Mr. Monocle and Top Hat is absolutely unbelievable. 4th base gets built. Usually at the 14-minute mark, Terran gets like his 7th orbital command center. It's an actual fact. I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen, especially against lurkers. Like you just need orbital commands, and this 4th base is way too late. Now you finally did start saturating this. Oh, just now actually. I think this base landed at like the 8-minute mark or so, or at the 7-minute mark. Has been undersaturated for the past 6 minutes. Too busy not building combat shield and overstimming the army to notice, I guess. 2 more hatcheries as well coming up for the Zerg. Like, this Zerg is actually macroing quite well. And the funny thing is, and one of the cool things, I often mention this, is when people kind of realize that they're not perfect, or they understand that they're not perfect, and they add like extra macro hatcheries just so they always have enough larvae. And as a result, the Zerg has been perfectly capable of spending his own money, kind of knowing, hey, I'm not perfect at this, I'm gonna lose a lot of army because my micro isn't brilliant, and I'm incapable of spending on my army because I'm not great at injecting either. He kind of realizes what his weaknesses are and kind of plays around this. I really think that is cool. Well, once again, you're gonna kind of... This guy just always comes from behind, by the way, off creep as well, super consistently. Still no combat shield in this army. You do have it on the way finally. You get absolutely blasted here once again. You are aware right now that there's at least 1 base on this far right side. And now you also see that there's another base here. So at this point you should be realizing that you're probably very far down economically. And that there's not going to be much of a way to get back into the game. Send out a Liberator. I kind of like it. A little bit of harassment. I wouldn't mind a couple of extra medeffects as well. You're floating 2,900 gas. How's that even possible? That's kind of wild, no? That actually is kind of wild. 2,900 gas. No Ghost Academy yet. You are getting siege tanks 2 at a time, which is good. I even like 1 or 2 Liberators, but the main issue is just the complete lack of medeffects in your army. Wait, where's the Liberator going? Okay, it's here. Sieged up, dealing some damage. This guy's coming in. You're not really... Well, you don't have any defenses whatsoever, so you're just straight up kind of going to die, I guess. Because you don't have enough crap, yeah. I think this is the first time where what you described actually kind of happens. Where the Terran isn't completely ready for the lurkers. And as a result, you just kind of sit there, have to lift your base, you lose 18 workers, and you pretty much lose the game. But... I mean, the reason why you don't have anything is not because of the lurker. The reason you don't have anything is because you lost your entire army on the left side and you lost your entire army on the right side. You haven't been building enough siege units and you have crap eco. Like, there is a very different issues kind of leading up to this problem. He gets 6 more lurkers. I mean, he still has plenty of money. Overall, units lost, by the way, you're still up 5k. So despite your pretty terrible trades on the right side and over here, you're still... doing somewhat okay. Once again, completely overstimming your army, or at least stimming everything at once for no real reason with a single medevac. You're gonna stim most likely again to run to this base or something like that, or once you get there you'll stim again. And Banelings will be able to one-shot you. Yep, here we go. Banelings will be rolling in and will be able to kill you at once. And this is a real issue. Like, you're completely dead as well, and I think this is the weird thing, is that Terrans often don't realize when they're completely dead. And that really is the case. Like, this game is not close whatsoever. This was not a close game. From start to finish, you were dead. You had 100 workers at the 9-minute mark or at the 8-minute mark. You had 54 workers at that point. It was like triple out-mining you. Yeah, GG gets caught. He also GG's. You lose the game. Now, if we actually... end here with the resources lost, we can see that despite you having lost your complete army and him still having an army, he is down in resources lost, but he still has what is this? This is like 8k resource bank, more 8.3k resources in the bank. You have absolutely nothing in the bank. You have no money. Like, the issue here wasn't the lurker. I do not understand how you can't see this. You're completely misjudging this game. The issue is that you did no damage whatsoever with your Hellions in the early. You did nothing with your Banshees. You did not keep the Zerg eco in check at once. Your initial push out was way too late at the 8-minute mark. When you did end up pushing, the fight did not go too well. Like, you lost your entire army while he stayed on a very high worker count. Your fort base was too late. Your second factory was way too late. You never got combat shield until the 14-minute mark. Like, the major fights were decided without combat shield. Honestly, your fights against lurkers were probably the best thing in this game. The fact that he didn't just mass Banelings was really helpful to you, because every single time you're about to engage into a fight, you stim your army 5 times, and because you only have 2 medevacs, it means that Banelings always one-shot your army. The problem for you isn't the lurker. The problem for you is more the Baneling. And the problem is that you don't attack your opponent whatsoever or harass your opponent whatsoever. And you're kind of expecting everyone to stay on 50 workers so you can out-macro them. But that's not how it works. If your opponent gets more workers than you, more bases, and has a lot of crap, like, even if your fights are going quite well, you're not going to be winning. It really feels like this entire essay that you wrote, because it was darn long, has nothing to do with this game. I remember, sometimes you have these little toys as a kid where you need to put the shape in the correct hole where it fits. So you have like a circle shape, and then you put it in the circle thing, and you have like a little triangle, and you put it in the triangle. And if I were to have to do this with imbalanced complaint forms and replays, this would be an impossible task. The triangle shape imbalanced complaint form here does not fit in the replay. I'd be the little idiot kid with, hammering the round shape into the triangle. It doesn't fit! It's like, it just doesn't work. Like, and nothing that you've described actually happened this game, I feel like. It was a nice essay, and I'll give you some style points for that, but it's just not true. Like, it just didn't happen. And I can say, like, the lurker is very frustrating to play against. I understand this. And many Terrans will have many replays where this shows, but this wasn't the replay. Your replay did not show you losing to the lurker. Your replay showed you losing to a guy with a lot more money. And, well, that's just life. So yeah, the lurker isn't in balance, my friend. You just suck. And that's the cold, hard truth. The cold, hard truth. All right. Thanks all for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Iodis. If you did, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see all of you next time for a new video. Thank you, and bye-bye.